So the core mythological structure of yoga is expressed in the myth of the Samudra Manthan. Sometimes there was an H put after the T because it's that T that has an aspirant after it, but it's Manthan. And we get the word mountain from that, but it is the churning action of the ocean, right? You remember Ananta, the snake, is used around Mount Meru, and one side is pulled by the devas and the other by the asuras. And this battle, this tug of war between them ends up churning the ocean. And the Mount Meru pillar is sitting on the great tortoise, who is the incarnation of Vishnu, the sustaining force of the universe. And then out of this ocean of consciousness come all of the let's say, the valuables of creation, the gods and goddesses in their archetypal form, as well as the wisdom and the powers, the cities, all of the great joys and forms of insight and bliss that can be imagined emerge out of the ocean. But also what emerges is the poison, the lethal poison of consciousness that has become degraded and trapped in the form of ego. And so we must understand a number of things from this myth, which is that as we meditate, we are churning the inner ocean because we are putting ourselves into that inner center, that space, Mount Meru, right, Kailash, that axis mundi, that then causes all of consciousness to become a vortex that spins around it. It's that vortex, you see, that then releases both the potential of the higher chakra manifestations, but the poisons of the lower chakras. And they must come out. So the manthan itself, like a washing machine, is the purification of the soul. But when the poisons come out, no one can deal with them. They have to call in Shiva to swallow the poison. Interestingly, Shiva's the only one who doesn't come out of the ocean. All the other gods and goddesses either are playing tug of war or they're emerging. But Shiva is always already there to be called upon. And he is the only one who can swallow the poison and transform it into nectar. So this is a very important thing to understand. And to understand it, we must see that the myth took two different forms as it went to the West. In the Middle East, it took the form of the prophet. And in the Greek form, it took that of Prometheus. You can see the Metheus and the Manthan, where the H is in there. It is a clear derivation. But the myth of Prometheus is different from the myth of Pramanthan. And the difference is that Prometheus is said to have stolen the light from the gods, the fire, and he is punished for it. Whereas in the Pramanthan story, and the Pramanthan can be considered a yogi, an individual yogi, within whose mind this process of purification is going on within one's soul. It's not a battle that takes place in the phenomenal plane between actual gods and demons, but between demonic tendencies of the ego and the divine tendencies or sanskaras of the soul that is linked with the Atman and manifests God consciousness. It is this struggle between these two intentions that are going on as a war within the soul of every being until the purification is complete, that is being recognized as each one's individual process as they enter into the spiritual path fully enough to discover what is in the lower subconscious as well as in the higher superconscious. But for the West, or the Greeks at least, from whom Western civilization derives its main perspective, it is an illegitimate stealing of the fire of the gods, and the gods punish Prometheus. Now you can take this in two ways, as it has been taken in Western mythology. One is that the gods were hoarding the fire, they weren't sharing it. The gods themselves were a degraded bunch of thugs by that time who wanted to keep humanity under control without intelligence. They were titans rather than gods, you could say. And that they were intending to keep humanity in the darkness of ignorance, which in fact is the very structure of Western civilization. It's structured to accomplish just that, so that one has to steal the fire from either distorted scriptures that don't reveal the truth completely and directly, or from incomplete and inadequate understandings that have been delivered by tradition or by the paranoia that surrounds the actual receiving of the holy fire. So that in the West, those who received the fire, who became avatars of the divine flame, were in fact punished, as Prometheus was. Look at Christ, crucified for the delivery of that wisdom and that light and power. Al-Hallaj in the Muslim tradition. Marguerite Porete. They were burned bodily by the physical fire for having dared to bring down the supreme fire of knowledge of God. And so it is dangerous to approach, and one is warned off and away from receiving the power that will in fact destroy the ego and the ego's structures of civilization writ large. But in the Middle Eastern tradition, it's slightly different, because the prophetes, this word, which evolves ultimately from the Sanskrit, but via phane and phanai. And interestingly, phane is a vision, a divine vision, like an epiphany, right? And phanai is speech, but divine speech, speech that reveals and gives a vision of the divine in words. And so the prophet is the one who comes to bring a vision through words of wisdom, of truth, that are brought down from the light which produces the vision. And that light, these words, they derive from vates, if we take it back earlier, which is became a Latin word. It was Etruscan and came into the Latin. You know it in Vatican and other terminology of the Roman Church. But that came from bhati, the Sanskrit word bhati. And I know before this class, some of you have done pranayamas, and one of them is called kapalbhati, which means to make the skull shine. And so the bhati, that becomes the fete, the prophet's essence, is the shining of divine light and love within his or her being. And this divine light produces not only visions, but it produces an energy field that creates the possibility of inaugurating a temple. A temple is a sacred space which has been dedicated to being authorized as the place of the deliverance of the vision and the Word of God. Interestingly, the word profane means to be in front of the temple, but not in it. Not in the place where the vision and the Word of God are spoken and received, but in that place where it cannot yet be heard or seen. But it is always within the precincts of the temple, because that is all that in truth is. And so the goal of yoga is to become a living temple, a temple of truth that gives a vision of the invisible God to those who cannot see and require a physical medium through which the divine luminosity can be felt palpably, and through the words of which the mind can be open to the truth of one's divine nature. And this in turn leads to the fana of the Sufis, which is the annihilation of the ego and the illusion. And the aphanesis, the disappearance of Maya and of all the malas, all the impurities that are produced not only within the mind of an individual, but in the world, which is a thought within the mind of God. And so the purification that the yogi is producing through this manthan, this effort of churning the ocean of knowledge and transforming the poison into the nectar of immortality, accomplishes this transformation not just for the individual, but for the world, because the individual is in resonance with the same creative power that dreams this apparently existing world into its own luminous, phenomenal appearance. And so the transformation that takes place is the disappearance of evil and imperfection through the realization and revelation of the perfection of the Supreme Being that is reflected throughout the cosmos.